The following is a production of New Mexico State University.
In their search for the 7 cities of gold, Juan Vasquez de Coronado's men staked a trail through the seemingly endless grass sea of El Llano Estacado. Seeking legendary gold on the staked plain that is eastern New Mexico and West Texas, they overlooked golden opportunity right beneath their feet. The abundant grass was a gold mine that was later worked by cattlemen like Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving, who made their fortunes supplying cattle to feed soldiers at western outposts like Fort Union. It gave rise to large ranches that were fueled by capital from the eastern U.S. and Europe. Clovis became the cattle capital of the Southwest, a major shipping point for cattle to Chicago and points east. And the plains attracted thousands of homesteaders who pinned their dreams on what seemed an endless supply of green gold. While some dreams were realized and others ended in disappointment, the traditions, values, and lifestyles spawned during the heyday of the territory remain as deeply rooted as the High Plains grass. However, without proper stewardship, grass and the traditions it feeds can easily vanish. Ranching and stewardship. To those who depend on the range for their livelihood, the two are synonymous. By taking care of the land, ranchers not only earn their livings, but ensure the futures of their children and grandchildren. In arid and semi-arid western climates, keeping grassland healthy is no small responsibility. In fact, many would argue that it's our foremost responsibility. History supports this view. Many early ranchers and farmers on the plains found to their dismay that grass, heavily foraged by livestock, might never recover. Unlike the wetter climates of the east and Midwest from which they migrated, on the plains there are years when no rain falls in the growing season and no grass grows. Early ranchers learned the hard way as they watched bare topsoil blow away during spring wind storms. Deep gullies appeared during periodic violent summer storms, and non-native and undesirable plants take hold where grass once grew. Western rangeland today still faces these same challenges. Fortunately, today's ranchers understand the fragile nature of the range, and agricultural science continually leads to new and better management practices to help ranchers meet these challenges. Today, agencies within the United States Department of Agriculture, like the Natural Resources Conservation Service and the Cooperative Extension Service, offer research-based advice that can aid land managers in making sound management decisions. And since 1996, Plains ranchers have benefited from the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. Administered by the NRCS, the EQIP program, as it's called, offers cost-sharing incentive options and technical assistance on a competitive basis to ranchers who implement practices that help conserve and improve rangeland resources.
EQIP is a locally led program where, rather than Washington deciding what we need to do in a particular spot, the local people, ranchers, farmers, government people get together and decide how best to use the program in that area. The intent of the program is for locally led conservation, and there's local work groups that get together and decide what programs are needed right there in the local area. And ranchers can have plans done on their ranch that indicate things that would help them do good things for their resources, and from there, EQIP is a program that can help them fund that.
Among those practices eligible for EQIP support are water development, brush control, cross-fencing, and grazing systems. These are key strategies for balancing herd management and grass management.
Well, a very important thing that ranchers need to keep in mind is they need to balance the resources with livestock and wildlife numbers on their ranches. They need to know what their ranches are capable of producing as far as grass production, and they need to balance the number of livestock, again, and the wildlife with those production resources on the ranch so that they don't overgraze, and they are really producing grass, not livestock. And so their crop is grass, and they need to take care of that grass. It relates back to production of livestock and their pocketbooks.
To ensure that grass is not overgrazed and has the opportunity to maintain healthy root systems, ranchers must pay close attention to stocking rates, livestock distribution, and to the time control of animals on the land. The general rule is to graze only half of the key grass species in an area before rotating livestock to a fresh pasture, or to allow livestock to graze the most palatable plants only once before moving on.
Grazing lands and ranches are very dynamic. Things are changing all the time. Some years you'll have lots of rainfall, other years you won't have hardly any rainfall. And some years you'll be in pastures at different times of the year, and there's a lot of things going on as far as grazing management, taking care of that grass and so forth. So you need to be flexible in your management of the grass with the livestock and adjust your numbers so that the intensity, the duration, and the severity of the grazing that you have out there is in balance or in line with the grass resources and what's going on out there on the rangeland. It's like dealing with the stock market almost, because Mother Nature's very, you don't know what she's going to do from day to day.
In addition to a proper rate of stocking, it is important to properly distribute animals on the rangeland. One way of doing this is to make sure that wells and stock tanks are dispersed across the ranch. A good rule of thumb is to locate water so that animals don't have to walk more than 2 miles to drink. Place salt licks away from water to encourage animals to spread out even more.
With the EQIP program, was able to put in this water system and do the brush control. Without them, it would have been a real slow process. On this pasture behind us here, I used to be able to run about 20 head of cattle, and I usually had to haul water at that, and now I'm able to run about 40 head.
Another strategy is to subdivide large pasture areas and rotate animals from pasture to pasture to give grass the time to regenerate.
About 3 or 4 years ago, we started into a rotational grazing system. Got our fences up. We have roughly 9 miles of pipe on this system here. We have probably 14 miles of fence. We have 15 different pastures. We're currently right now running 140 head of cows where we started out with 95. And we're on a 90-day rotation. They'll be in each pasture 5 to 7 days. They came into this pasture about 3 o'clock this afternoon. We'll take it down about 50% and then let it come back. Try not to overgraze.
Going back on the history, the ranch was always a continuous grazing. And back then it was probably stocked at about 1 animal unit to 30 acres. And now that we've moved to holistic resource management and an intensive grazing system, we on the average are stocking now about 1 to 22. And but now even during the drought, there were times during the year we were up to a 1 to 40, but then we would intensively come in at certain times of the year during the dormant season at a pretty high stocking rate. So we still averaged about 1 to 25 even during the drought. But you just have to be real flexible. The animals become a tool. They're no longer a pride of ownership necessarily. They become a tool because the primary goal now is to produce grass, which we then farm with animals.
After each grazing period, plants quickly replace leaves lost without depleting root reserves. The animals are introduced to fresh pasture before plants are overgrazed, and livestock have access to new succulent growth at frequent intervals. Rotational grazing gives ranchers flexibility in responding to changing forage supply. During periods of rapid plant growth, animals can be moved quickly through pastures or paddocks. During dormant season or during drought periods, when grass is not actively growing, animals may graze without damaging the plants. During periods of slow growth, pastures can be allowed longer recovery periods. If necessary, grazing can be supplemented with hay. Whether cattle are intensively rotated through smaller pastures or herded from large area to large area, it is paramount that one area be rested each growing season as insurance against drought. On El Llano Estacado and across the West, rainfall is the limiting factor in production of rangeland. We can't control how much rain falls during the growing season, but we can control how much of the rainfall penetrates the soil profile. Maintaining healthy grass cover slows runoff giving rain time to percolate into the soil. Not only does that encourage further grass production, it eliminates erosion of valuable topsoil, minimizes pollution of surface water, recharges the underground aquifers, and helps maintain overall healthy watersheds. Grass is a major player in a healthy rangeland ecosystem. When any part of that system is out of balance, disaster is right around the corner. In the 1880s, 1930s, and even in the 1950s, severe droughts wiped out many ranchers who weren't prepared. It was during those times when the range was severely stressed that brush and invasive plants took a foothold. For example, mesquite, pinon, juniper, salt cedar, and shinnery oak, naturally occurring species, outcompeted grass for water in many areas.
When we first came on this country, it's been about 12, 14 years ago now, we noticed that the grass seemed to be a little bit depressed by the amount of shinnery oak, which is a low-growing oak species that has a tremendous underground root system. One of the things we thought we'd do is to come in here and try to treat one way or another some of this shinnery to reduce its effect on the grasses. Traditionally, in the old days, probably in the early 1800s at least, most of this country was covered by tall grasses, the Indian grass and big blue stem, sand blue stem, stuff that should be 5, 6, 7 feet tall most seasons. What's happened over the years, with 150 years of different types of grazing and a lot of it to excess, is that the oak has become what they call co-dominant with the grass species that we would like to see here in more abundance. And really the only practical way we found to reduce the oak is to use a chemical called tebutheron. We got involved with the EQIP program, which is a cost-sharing program put out by the NRCS to help us defray the cost. It costs about $34 an acre to control the oak. Shortly after, we were paying as little as $55, $60 an acre for this kind of rangeland. To throw another $35 on the top for control turns it into a very expensive endeavor. What we found is, and through a lot of research, is that it actually pays off over a period of 10 years. In other words, it does pencil out with increased grass growth and just a more desirable wildlife habitat if things are managed properly after the treatment.
Range conservationists have worked side by side with ranchers since the 1940s to help find ways to control invasive plants. But throughout the West, the problem looms larger and larger. Today, invasive weeds are considered the #1 threat to western rangeland. Invasive weeds have been compared to a biological wildfire that is out of control and spreading in western states.
It's estimated that invasive species are spreading at a rate of around 250 acres an hour. Now you think about that, that equates to, in 2 hours, the area the size of my family's dairy farm being infested with invasive weeds. The number is about 17 million acres of public lands infested in the West with invasive species. We know that in New Mexico there's lots of public lands. Now, that 17 million acres doesn't include the private lands or the state lands either, though. So tremendous acreages have been infested by these weeds.
Why are weeds such a threat? First, spiny weeds such as thistles and nightshades can injure grazing animals and restrict their access to forage and water. Second, because these plants are non-native, they have no natural competitors. Often they have deep, narrow taproots that steal water from perennial grasses, but do not have the grass's ability to bind the soil in heavy rain. Thus, runoff and soil erosion is increased. Third, some invasive plants even alter soil chemistry substantially. Salt cedar, which invades riparian areas, drastically increases soil salinity. Noxious invasive weeds are currently spreading from the west and from the north toward New Mexico, staking a trail of ecological and economic destruction. In the mid-1980s, the value of the 1,360-acre Taylor Ranch in Klamath County, Oregon, dropped from $150 an acre to $22 an acre because leafy spurge had severely reduced its productivity. The owner spent more than $65,000 in a futile attempt to restore the land before abandoning the ranch entirely. In 1994, grazing capacity lost to leafy spurge in Montana, North and South Dakota, and Wyoming would have supported a herd of about 90,000 cows, generating about $37.1 million in annual livestock sales. In addition to leafy spurge, rangelands are threatened by yellow star thistle, musk thistle, knapweed, and hoary cress. Seeds can sneak in on loads of hay. Vehicles traveling from other states may unsuspectingly smuggle them onto rights of way or into parks. It's imperative that ranchers be ready to meet this invasion head on. The best way to keep noxious weeds from gaining a foothold on our rangeland is to outcompete them. This means maintaining healthy grass cover so that non-native species will have greater difficulty taking hold.
Nature abhors a vacuum. So you kill the plant, usually nature replaces it with something else, and a lot of times those are invasive or noxious weeds. And invasive noxious weeds will take over the native plants and reduce production on your ranch, and therefore make it really hard for that rancher to succeed.
When it comes to addressing the invasive species in the state of New Mexico, the first step really has to be prevention. We need to keep them out. Second only to prevention is an early detection. We need to identify them not only when they're in the seedling or a younger stage of growth, but when they're in small populations. A researcher in Idaho has said by the time you recognize you've got a problem, it's too late. So that would tell us critically that we've got to first prevent them from coming in, and second of all, identify them when they're in small infestations and get rid of them as soon as we can.
Once weeds are identified, an integrated management plan can be designed using mechanical, chemical, or biological control methods. Spraying with herbicides or grubbing out weeds are commonly used methods of control, and studies are now showing that biological methods can also be very effective. Research on knapweed-infested test plots in Montana have shown that root-boring moths and weevils introduced from Eastern Europe and Asia reduce the knapweed infestation by 70%. Sheep and goats will graze on leafy spurge for 45 to 50% of their diets, turning the scourge of spurge into an economic asset.
If you don't start a program of controlling these weeds when they're first arriving in the country, they'll get way ahead of you. I have a friend over in Springer that has acres and acres of this musk thistle, and it's one plant can put out thousands of seeds. So if you allow this plant to seed and go to seed, it can throw seeds for many, many acres, and you never know next year where you're going to find the plant. Of course, it's a biennial plant, so you can't maybe even notice where it goes to seed until the second year. We have a good program of trying to find the rosettes when they're in the first year or the second year as they come out, and spray them. And when we find them, we do spray them. If we do not catch them, then we have a good program, and all of my guys know what musk thistle looks like, and they spend time with a shovel and chopping them at the ground level, which will take care of this specific plant. Not all plants are that easy to take care of. Some take different management strategies to control. I think the important thing with noxious weeds is that no property owner is an island, and it's a cooperative deal that we all have to work together to manage these weeds. And if you have a neighbor that does not care or won't do anything, then your efforts may go in vain. So we all have to get together and do it.
Easily damaged and slow to heal, the rangeland of El Llano Estacado requires careful stewardship and management. The best management includes ongoing range monitoring to document the condition of vegetation from year to year. An easy but effective means of monitoring involves taking photographs at fixed sites on the range at the beginning and end of every growing season. Sites should be representative of the range in general, not situated next to water where animal density would tend to be greater than average, or in the corner of a pasture where animals would graze less frequently.
We do have a 25-year plan on this ranch, and one of the big things that we found when we first started this program is the amount of bare ground that we have. So monitoring is going to enable us to track the bare ground and that we are decreasing the amount of bare ground. Now, it may not be that we're covering it with plants, but at least if we're covering it with litter, then that's the ultimate goal. We just don't want the actual bare soil to the elements. You don't get as much wind erosion, and when you do get the little amounts of rainfall that we do, when it hits something besides bare ground, it will go ahead and soak in.
Then and now, vigilance, and sound stewardship are key to survival on the plains. By adopting management strategies that promote proper stocking and distribution of animals so that grass is not overgrazed. Resting an area of the ranch every growing season as insurance against drought. And monitoring and controlling invasive brush and weeds, ranchers can protect their roots and ranching traditions. With the latest scientifically based information available from the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the Extension Service, and through programs like EQIP, Eastern New Mexico ranchers can be equipped to make sound management decisions. Sound decisions, rooted in tradition, right for today, will sustain our rangeland resources for tomorrow.
The preceding was a production of New Mexico State University. The views and opinions in this program are those of the author and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the NMSU Board of Regents.